Perfect. We are live. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon on the West Coast. It is a privilege and a record number amount of registrants, and I see we're already getting close to triple digits. So, welcome, everybody. We're going to jump right in because I know a number of you are in the waiting room and slowly starting to roll in. So, first of all, welcome. It is as we start to wind up 2025. This is sort of part two of what we had as a great initial webinar series and talking about some of the core key issues that we get every single day. If this is the first webinar, a Serious Consulting Group webinar, welcome. It's a true privilege to have you. We try to run one of these every month with key subject matter experts across North America to really help to make sure that you're not feeling alone in all of this and that your challenges and your practice are not unique to you. I heard a staggering stat, gentlemen, the other day that many doctors, after they've opened their first practice, is one of the last practices they walk into for the rest of their lives, meaning they don't have the chance to see, be within other practices. Again, so it's relying on the different dental supply companies or otherwise for these best practices. So we're happy to assemble this. We have three incredible speakers. As we get things ramped up, in the webinar chat is open. Let us know what part of the continent you're joining us from this evening. Q&A is open. I know there's tons of questions about people, employees, culture, toxic cultures, employment contracts. Oh my! As we go through, and also we're going to try to customize a few things tonight. So you will see a quick 9 section polls, which will give a little bit of some multiple choice, multiple answers type of thing. And we're happy to customize some of that based on some of the top challenges. So poll number one will be top challenges for your practices today. That can be multiple answer. What kind of staff challenges are you having, right? What type of and what area do you think are costing your clinic the most amount? What best describes your situation and beyond? Take a quick second for that, which is key. As we kick things off, and I'll go to some quick introductions here, is owning a dental practice isn't just about patients and productions, as we now know. The results from the poll in the last section were staggering. The amount of time spent working in the clinic versus on the clinic was almost 90 to 95% in versus on. So it's all about now more than ever. It's more complicated to open a clinic today than it was 5 years prior, than it was 5 years prior, than it was 5 years prior to that. Managing people, culture, risk has become a bigger and bigger challenge. Um, so really, this is a really advanced sort of 2.0 follow-up session for the expert panel to tackle some of these key, toughest challenges that dentists face as business owners. And it's not just you as dentists. Talk to any entrepreneur. What's the biggest challenge? It's people, people, people. Handling troublesome employees, we're going to dig into tonight. Navigating toxic workplace dynamics. Is that most tenured person on your team a hidden cancer? Are there, group texts going on behind your back working against you and all the initiatives you're trying to do? Addressing sensitive personalities, which is key, right? Marcy doesn't like Jim's music in the background. And how now has this become your issue, right? Without derailing the practice. So we're going to dive into some must-haves in terms of employment contracts, handbooks, policies, right? As well as other contracts and certainly how to do the right ways to hire and fire. So we're going to go through some real world scenarios, some updated practical situations, and really giving you some key things that you can do in your practice starting tomorrow morning. So it's designed to give you all the clarity, confidence, and strategies you can put into action immediately to safeguard your business and, most importantly, reduce stress. Many of you have young families. Many of you have everything from wills and estate planning to all these other pieces to try to hold a family together. And with 2 young kids myself, I can empathize. By the end of this, you want to be able to recognize and address workplace red flags, such as toxic culture, disruptive employees, and overly sensitive dynamics before they escalate. Understand the critical role of contracts and policies, employment contracts, handbooks, minimizing legal financial exposure, lease contracts. Number three, develop some good strategies for hiring and firing to protect both you and the practice, and identifying some of those top pain points for practice ownership and gain some good actionable solutions. David Harris goes without saying, is truly one of the renowned speakers on dental embezzlement. David will share some facts that it is astounding that the vast majority of dentists either have been embezzled or know someone that has been a victim of embezzlement. David is the foremost expert. He is unrivaled experience, forensic CPA, and private investigator. David, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly appreciated, sir.
Good to be with you, Eric.
Alan Twigg, president of Bent Erickson and Associates. BE makes HR approachable and straightforward. 20 years of experience, the people side of the business, go-to guide for navigating HR across all states and beyond. Truly helping to make sure that the ever-changing HR landscape throughout coast to coast to coast, competitive advantage because people again are the greatest practical assets. And AI isn't going to replace the drill in your hand anytime soon, but we'll certainly touch on some of that as well, or maybe the next one. Last but not least, Dr. Martin Mendelson, it is a privilege. Thank you for joining us. I know you've got an incredibly busy schedule, so we'll go to you first. Founder of Metamorphosis Coaching, former member of the resident faculty of Spear Education, which is certainly world renowned. His goal ultimately is to help you, the dentist, get out of their own way through the science of mindset, communication, and productivity, whether it's on stage, one to one, or with your teams. And the new book, signed copies are out if you haven't received yours already. One Move Makes All the Difference will be published now coming up in December, and press release went out today. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Perfect. And myself, last but not least, I'm your humble moderator this evening as the owner of Sears Consulting Group. And let's jump in, guys. So let's pick up where we left off. In the last webinar, a few hundred doctors were really interested in the content, and it really boiled down to a number of challenges facing the dental clinics today. Blind spots, if you will, staffing challenges, compliance, embezzlement, uh, dreaded office lease, all those sorts of things. So maybe to kick this one off, and Dr. Mendelson, I'll give you the first one because you were our honorary moderator last time. High level again, let's talk about 2026 as we move into the new year. What are some of those high level challenges you see your clients and practices facing across the country?
Yeah, everyone knows that we're all having challenges with keeping qualified team members and or finding qualified team members. And so the truth of the matter is that people don't decide to leave overnight in most cases. And so one of the quotes that's come to me more recently is by Peter Drucker, the famed management consultant. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so we can have all the SOPs in the world, but if our culture is suffering, then people aren't going to follow it. And do we have the psychological safety within the practice so that people can bring things to your attention so that they can be rectified? And that's a bunch of fancy words for just saying, do people feel comfortable within the practice in which they work? And if the answer is yes, then they're going to talk. If the answer is no, then they're not going to. Super simple concepts, not necessarily so easy. And there's lots of different methodologies for how to open up that psychological safety. But I can tell you, in all the practices I've been in, all the labs I've been in, all the teams I've worked in, that's the key is people feeling comfortable enough to bring things up when things aren't going well, which we know happens. And that always precedes people leaving, period. End of story.
Excellent. So, some live staff results. Alan, I'll give it to you next. Staff issues, 82% in terms of top challenges. Maybe not a surprise. Patient challenges. Now, again, it's not going to equal 100 because it's a multiple, but 82% is staff, gentlemen, 23% is patients, 20% is financial, employment contracts, 10%, and the rest as we go down. So, Alan, over to you, sir. What are you seeing now on the HR side? Post-COVID, high rates, hygienists, beyond. Alan, over to you, sir.
Yeah, in terms of 2026 and big challenges. The first one I'll mention is compliance. So, in the last 5 years, there have been 328 federal and state compliance changes. So, that's new laws, that's big changes to existing laws. And we work just in the US, so that's US, all 50 states. So, that's a lot, 328 in 5 years. So, if folks out there have an employee handbook that hasn't been updated in a while, it's probably out of date at this point. Another big one, related to staffing is just we talk to a lot of dentists who just feel stuck with the team that they have, and the team is kind of, in some cases, some of the team members are just mediocre or they're downright bad, but there's that thing of, well, I don't want them to leave because I can't replace them. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think that's a big challenge, is just feeling stuck, that you can't get the team that you want, the culture you want, because there's not the people out there to do that. And the last big challenge, I think, is just AI, specifically AI as it relates to HR. So because of AI, employees can find information way more readily than they could a few years ago. More and more states have been publishing information online, but AI just so succinctly categorizes it, summarizes it. Now, to be clear, AI is not 100% accurate, and I would definitely not recommend that people use AI for all of their HR compliance. But from the standpoint of risk to the practice, and this idea of your employees knowing things that 20 years ago no one had ever even heard of, today that is a legitimate risk, and AI is making that more of a risk.
Excellent. Second one, David, is a good lead in for you. What kind of staff challenges are you having? Of the 60% that have filled the poll results, 56% culture and morale, gentlemen, 57% lack of accountability, 18% a perceived lack of respect and or insubordination, which is interesting. And then 15%, David, is a great lead in for you, is the trust and or lack of trust, and perhaps perceived both ways. Mr. Harris.
Yeah. The thing that we're seeing repeatedly now that definitely is a cause of concern for me is most practices that we encounter lack the basic financial controls that should be there. Whether it's how duties are divided up between team members or what kind of oversight the practice owner exerts, most practices are lacking. And where this puts the doctor is that for a lot of, probably for 70% of the dental practices we see, the only barrier between the doctor and embezzlement is that the staff have chosen to be honest when they could equally have made another choice and gotten away with it. And let's be frank here. I know very few dentists who chose dentistry as their career path because they really, really, really wanted to own a business. For most of the dentists I meet, their joy comes from their clinical work and their interactions with patients and things like that. And the idea of running the place and being the leader comes a very distant second in the things they want to do. But if you don't put those controls in place, then sooner or later, and the stats are pretty clear, 70% of dentists will be stolen from sooner or later. If you don't put those controls in place, it's going to happen to you.
Which is so interesting because the rise of obviously the multi-sites, the DSOs, etc., and the young associates that are graduating with record-breaking debt, suddenly, oh my gosh, if I, open my own clinic, that's more debt. Going to be an employee. I'm an employee now. I'm going to be an employer. There's going to be contracts and handbooks, and what happens if? It creates a heck of a story that is a reason why there's great groups, as we were saying before, David, Dental Advisory Board or otherwise, of just getting the right members together to help take some of that stress off the shoulders. So, Dr. Mendelson, I'll come back to you. Cultural problems
Yeah.
is a big one.
Yeah.
And just to relate that back to the poll, what do you think is costing your practice more money than it should today? Interestingly enough, To David's point, 45% is inefficient systems and poor controls. That's number one. Number two is team performance and leadership gaps, 42. HR compliance, 22%, and so on. So cultural problems, Dr. Mendelson.
Yeah.
From that,
So
please.
yeah, so the team stat, the 42% you just talked about, that leads back to the accountability one from the other poll question.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I always have taken to heart is the idea that we need to get out of our own way in thinking that we do something that's unique. And now let me explain. When the patient's reclined and their mouth is open, yes, what we do is unique. But everything that gets them to the chair, saying yes in the chair, getting out of the chair, paying their bill, and making their next appointment is not. And that goes to everything related to leadership. So we need to look to other industries and data for guidance. One of which is a small company you probably never heard of before called Google. And about a little over 10 years ago now, they did a study of 100 plus teams to find out what made groups of individuals most successful. The number one conclusion was structure and clarity. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I say this with a smile on my face, what's lacking in most dental practices is structure and clarity relative to standard operating procedures, employee job descriptions, benchmarking, growth conferences or reviews. All of that stuff is missing. And so when that's missing as a foundational element, then you start having challenges with accountability. Then when you bring in lack of training on the part of the dentist, no fault of his or her, we were worried about cutting teeth or removing them, right? Restoring them. So it creates this perfect storm to create these challenges that we see on a regular basis. But the good news is these challenges can be rectified with finding the right people, with people like Alan and David and yourself and me to help support you in those areas where there are gaps. Because when we get these things established and we create a culture of accountability because things are documented and things are discussed and things are not swept under the rug, then people can no longer hide. And does it cause, in certain circumstances, people to self select out? Yes, it does. But then the people coming in are the ones that truly want to be there within the confines of this greater level of structure. And that's where the magic happens. I've seen it over and over and over again.
Interesting. So when we look at, David, from that perspective, because really interesting, inefficient systems and poor controls is exactly what you're letting on. What are some of those, shall we say, risk factors or early shifts in teams' thoughts, emotions, behaviors that signal cultures drifting or signaling that there might be a greater risk of embezzlement or inappropriate behavior, shall we say?
Eric, great question. Embezzlement happens when there's a confluence of two factors. And one of those factors is that you have staff who are acting like they're unhappy or maybe even acting like they're stealing. And we could discuss for a long time, and we won't, what stealing behavior looks like. But an example of the way an employee behaves when they're stealing is they tend to get really territorial. So possessive about their duties, and it might even flow into the possession of their workspace. So if somebody else sits at their computer, this employee gets pretty upset. So on the one side, you have that kind of behavior, and again, there's a lot of different manifestations of it. And on the other side, you have deficient control systems. And when those two things coexist, then the risk of embezzlement goes way up. I already said that most practices don't have really good control systems. So in a lot of cases, it's really just the one set of variables that indicates that you're vulnerable. People who are reluctant to take a vacation would be a warning sign. Staff who visibly complain about how much money they think the doctor makes. And I think we all know this. Most staff grossly overestimate what the doctor takes home. And that becomes a what we call a rationalization catalyst. It gives a staff member the ability to say, I know that stealing is wrong in general, but it's okay in this case because. Um, so when people start rationalizing deviant behavior, that's a big warning sign.
So, Alan, same question, right? Shifts, right? What to look out for as we think about, gosh, you know what? It's interesting that, Susie and Jim are going to lunch together, or they're sort of looking at each other in the meetings, or they're rolling their eyes, or they seem to exhibit some behaviors that are starting to feel like they're working more against you than with you, type of thing. What's some key pieces there, or what's your guidance to many of your clients if they see that, and then what do you do for that sort of immediate attention?
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough one. So I think in some practices, if folks are really just heads down serving the patients, it sometimes doesn't come up until you have turnover. And that's sometimes the first sign, especially someone who you thought was a really great employee, someone who seemed happy. All of a sudden they're leaving and it seems like a total surprise. And especially if you talk to them and they say, well, it's because I can get $1 more an hour over here. It's not about the dollar, it's about culture, it's about something else going on. I think that one easy warning sign is just a lack of people willing to help out. So when there is some sort of little bit of extra need or a little bit of extra something, if no one is stepping up and saying, yes, I'll take that on, or if it's only maybe one person and everyone else is not, that's a warning sign. Certainly just overall engagement and disengagement. So how participatory are people in meetings? How much does it just seem like people are just kind of sitting there and they're clocking in and clocking out versus really engaged in making the practice better, suggesting ideas, suggesting new improvements, little systems. Hey, if I do this, we can do this a little bit better. That's what you want. When you don't have that, it's a sign of disengagement. And the last one I'll just throw out there is just a lack of laughter. I mean, even if you're have one of these practices that's super posh and professional and really, by the book and clean and all of that, there should be laughter in the office. There should be banter. There should be employees having a good time. It should seem like we're enjoying ourselves at least some amount of the time. So think about when you're sitting there, regardless of which operatory you're in or your office or something, how often do you hear laughter down the hallway? You know, and for some doctors, they may say, I don't care about laughter. I don't want laughter. That's, people, making jokes or being distracted. But for I think most of us, it is about the culture and the culture of positivity, enjoyment, having a good time. We spend however many hours at work, we might as well enjoy it. So think about how much laughter you hear in your practice.
Is that where the green sunglasses are behind you, just to, add a little levity from time to time?
That's yeah, those are called gratitude glasses from Amanda Gore, who spoke at our HR conference a few years ago. And yeah, you put those on. And if you don't have those, here's a little tip. If you don't
Yeah.
have the big gratitude glasses, you just go like this, and then you can turn to people and say, I'm thankful for you. And then these gratitude glasses, as Amanda says, are with you at all times. You don't have to worry about packing them.
Oh, it's key. And we had some spirited conversation because there was a couple of doctors that said, what more can I do for the staff, the employees, etc. So I'm going to ad lib a little bit here. Dr. Mendelson, maybe from your perspective here, before we go to question number three, and we truly appreciate your time. Looking at this again, looking at the situations, there's about 13% that are planning to open or relocate the clinic. About 6% are looking to acquire. 20% looking to transition in the next 5 years, the balance more or less staying put, just to give a little bit of a framework there. So, from a leadership perspective, right, a dental leadership perspective, manager perspective, any other good, tangible best practices, Dr. Mendelson, that you do with your clients, et cetera, to help on the cultural side or lead by example, but also, handling these sorts of, shall we say, one-off challenging behaviors or dealing with sort of troublesome staff?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that then will clue into some of the things Alan said about warning signs as well. Because, yeah, listen, we spend more time with these people than anybody else on the planet, that just from a pure time perspective. So, uh, we I'm not foolish enough to say that we have to be best friends with everybody. Far from it. Yet By the same token, we should have a lot of we need to have a little level of camaraderie enough that we still enjoy spending time with each other. And so celebrating by doing X activity that's social based at the end of a quarter, at the end of a year, what have you, but also learning together. And I've really seen this as a huge red flag for those team members that aren't willing or interested in learning. That to me is a huge red flag because if they're just looking to stay in their lane, check in, clock out, that's a huge red flag. Versus the practices that get really excited about going to a CE event or bringing somebody in. I think those are the important things relative to socialization within the confines of this business that we call dental practice. And again, to bring in data from outside of dentistry, I won't go into it, but the longest study ever conducted in human history followed hundreds of graduates at Harvard throughout their lives for 75 years. The number one finding was, quote, the warmth of human relationships garners the greatest level of life satisfaction, unquote. So how you feel about the people around you is incredibly important. And if all we're doing is, to use a phrase, drill and fill, and we're not spending time to learn together, break bread together, have fun together, well, Houston, we might have a problem.
Interesting. Maybe just to expand on that, and we'll go to the third key question we had is disruptive, overly sensitive team members accountable, the dreaded accountability.
Yeah.
How do we do it while still protecting culture and make sure they're not running off and, you know,
Yeah.
jumping onto a group chat and, throwing into the bus behind the scenes?
I have a very simple but not that easy answer. It's a book called Crucial Conversations. And there is a framework in there that is like magic. And because the framework is all based on starting with facts, that then leads into creating safety through your words, and then sharing your own story, which is an interpretation of the facts that we have all agreed on. Like it's irrefutable that Susie or Johnny has come in late three times, yeah, come in 20 minutes late, 3 out of the last 10 working days. That's irrefutable. And so it starts with facts. It creates safety because the intention of a crucial conversation, as the authors talk about it, is when you want to bring the relationship forward. So if this is an individual that you want to retain and grow, then it is a life-changing book to reduce your fear of having these conversations and allow them to be more productive and more effective to combat these type of scenarios and situations.
Fantastic. We appreciate it. And we know you've got many, many commitments. Truly appreciate you joining as well. We
Yes.
get you for a
Yeah.
couple more minutes, but we know you need to drop
Yeah.
fairly
I'll
soon,
drop
but
in a few.
greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
Mr. Twig, accountability, right? Especially from an HR perspective. What are some of those key pieces, especially if you've got someone that maybe, shall we say, overly sensitive or someone that is disruptive, challenging, or otherwise? And just as a reminder, I know there's been some hand raises. The Q&A section is open, or feel free to put any general questions into the chat as well, and we'll try to knock those off as we go, and we'll give some time for Q&A at the end as well.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on what Dr. Martin said about facts, objectivity, and then just kind of going into it with the intention to make this better. That all of that is huge. Number one thing to keep in mind always is keep in mind your good employees. We have a tendency to focus on the bad employees. What am I going to do about the bad person? I got to get rid of this bad person. But always think about your good employees because the majority of the workers in your practice are good employees. They want to do a good job. If given the right environment, they will be successful and do what you need them to do. What kills a good employee faster than anything is tolerating a bad one. And so with that, I think it's just all the basic foundational things. Do you have a policy manual? Do you have job descriptions? Have you clearly communicated your expectations? Since we're talking about holding someone accountable, you obviously need to make sure that they signed off on those documents. That is really important for your protection. This one is so critical. Have the conversation early. Have the conversation early on where You're not waiting months or years for this person. You're addressing their issues early on and having that crucial conversation, courageous conversation. Uh, and most of the time, a lot of these issues, when it's someone that you recently hired, if you can address it early on, you can actually address it in a real positive way that we're talking about, where it's not about, oh, you've been screwing up for the last 2 years. It's about saying, hey, in our office, this is the way we do it, and you just kind of make a little adjustment. Beyond that, all the basic HR things, which I won't go into. I mean, verbal warnings, written warnings, hire slow, fire fast, those kinds of things. Folks can reach out to me if you have someone who is like that. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you about it.
Perfect. Mr. Harris, same thing, right? The accountability. It's really interesting because part of your analysis is so behind the scenes and looking through the systems and
Yeah.
right, et cetera. How do you deal with accountability, especially if there is a potential embezzlement risk?
A couple of things here. First of all, one of my investigators, and she's somebody Alan knows fairly well, Amber Weber Gonzalez. One of the things that she said to me once that has always stuck with me is that one of the first casualties of embezzlement is transparency. In other words, when somebody is stealing, they don't want to share information with you, or at least information that might point towards their stealing. So, you have staff who don't give you reporting, for example, that comes out of your practice management software, or things that maybe you were used to getting in the past kind of slowly disappear. And a lot of times the dentist might not even notice this. And that kind of leads to my second point, which is that accountability takes effort on the part of the dentist. I have a lot of dentists who say to me, well, I hold my staff accountable for their behavior. And I ask a couple of questions. Okay, well, what do you do to hold them accountable? And I kind of get this puzzled look on their face. I have to do something. I can't just pronounce that they're accountable and it happens. And the other thing that accountability takes is it takes an understanding of whatever the job is of the person you're holding accountable. In other words, Eric, if you work in my practice as a treatment coordinator, and I don't really understand what that job entails, not necessarily to the point of being able to replace you and do it myself, but if I don't have a basic understanding, then holding you accountable is very hard. It's hard to manage people. It's easy to manage people doing the same job you're doing, or people doing a similar job to what you do. In other words, it's a lot easier for a dentist to manage a hygienist than it is for them to manage an office manager. Because the dentist has a pretty good idea of what the hygienist does and probably did that job in second year of dental school, but has far less understanding of how the office manager spends their day and what really is going to make somebody successful in that position. So what I'm saying is accountability is not a theoretical concept. To hold somebody accountable, you need to invest the time and energy in understanding what they do enough that you can evaluate how they're doing it.
Understood. And so, Alan, switching gears a little bit here, because again, those systems, procedures, etc. Let's get a little more tactical if we could. So, fourth big one that came from the last event we had was systems, routines that can really help practice owners create these consistent, predictable cultures where expectations are clear beyond just the written side, but reinforced, let it staff meetings or otherwise, or one-to-ones when there's deviations, and these issues that don't snowball. So maybe if we could, some tactical pieces, and the knowledge pearls, if you will, is always the buzzword. Systems, routines for you, Alan. What are your thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah. So a few ideas. So one would be just having real clarity around as the practice leader, what your values are, what the practice's values are, and not just, accountability and culture and buzzwords and all that, but what does it really mean for you? And how does that manifest in the day-to-day running of the practice? So when we have a patient who's late, this is how we handle it. When we have someone who is having trouble paying their bill, this is how we handle it. It's just all of those kinds of ideas of how you want it to run. And as David just kind of mentioned, this idea of having the courage to enforce those values and really hold people accountable for what you want to build with your office, I think that's big. Um, even just basic things of, not in a real hokey way, but just a way of having the employee be able to repeat back to you what your expectations are. Can they not just have you told them, but can they tell you what it is that you want? Certainly policy manuals, job descriptions, those kinds of things are important. But, you mentioned, I think, this idea of check-ins. And so I think whether it's performance reviews that are formal or informal or something, just checking in with your employees on a regular basis about how they're doing, how you're feeling about them, what's working, what's not working. It doesn't have to be really complicated or real formal. It doesn't even have to be in writing. Just this idea that you are doing those regular check-ins and communication with folks, that's really important. If folks want a real simple 3-question framework, number one, ask people what fills their bucket. What is something that, that they would do all day long and be happy? Number two is what is one thing that they would like to see change? Not everything, but one thing. And number three is what is something that they would like to learn, something they'd like to grow or kind of expand their knowledge into. Just simple framework there. And word of caution, if you're going to do that, be prepared to take action. People may bring problems, they may bring opportunities to you, and you need to make sure that you take action on that. The worst thing you can do is ask people for their feedback, get the feedback, and then not do anything about it. So don't ask the question unless you're ready to, take action on the answers.
I'll add one little piece just as an extra cautionary tale from the Cirrus side and the office lease side, because when we talk about systems, routines, consistent predictability, etc., just one word to the wise for the 22% that are either month to month or have a lease that's coming up in the next 2 years. From consistency and routines, track those lease expiry dates, track those option to renew deadlines. The last thing we need is cultural upheaval of having to relocate the clinic or otherwise, or even worse, bonuses go away because the landlord has just done a 40% rent increase. So starting that lease renewal process 2 years in advance. Just a little tidbit there in terms of systems and routines. Putting those in the calendar goes a long, long way, David, as you and I have done a lot of these in the past. David, same thing, systems, routines. I tell you, since we've started doing these together almost a decade now, the credit card statements are all digital going to my email. They're not going to the office, redirect those to home, checking the alarm logs, those sorts of things to see who's coming and going and when, are just some that I've personally done based on your great guidance. But what are some other good best practices, David, systems, routines to help keep those consistent, predictable components of culture?
One of the best changes you can make, and this is really low cost protection against a lot of things. Employee theft is a big part of it, is to divide up duties properly. A really common theme we see when a dental practice owner gets stolen from is there's one staff member who handles all the money. And they receive patient payments and they record those payments in practice management software. And they do the balancing at the end of the day and they make the bank deposits, and all those functions are concentrated in one person. And that's convenient, because it's way easier in a lot of ways to have just one staff member touching the money. It is also leaving your wallet with money in it on your desk in your private office when you go to check hygiene patients. So division of duties is really important. And the point of division of duties is to make it so that if somebody's going to steal from you, they have to involve a coworker. And the mere requirement to do that will deter about 80% of thieves. You know, for me to say to you, Eric, I really want to steal from our mutual boss, but I need your help. That will stop most would-be thieves in their tracks.
Hmm.
So if you set up a system of divided duties, and we're talking here about the revenue cycle, so it's patients being billed and payments being received, and those payments being recorded, and end of day balancing and bank deposits. Those are kind of the revenue cycle tasks. And if we take those and divide them properly among team members, we get low cost, long-term protection against employee theft.
Very, very good.
If you have a big office, you know, if you have 5 front desk staff, this is easy. If you have that classic one dentist, one hygienist, one assistant, one front desk person, it's a lot more challenging. And now you have to get a bit creative. For example, possibly the doctor gets the mail, which is a great way to take one of those tasks and take it away from that front desk person. Maybe at the end of the day, one of your assistant's responsibilities is to do what's called day-end balancing, which is when what you collected in practice management software gets lined up against what goes into the bank, because those two should be the same. So that might be something that your assistant does as part of their end of day routine. So you have to, if you're in a smaller practice, you definitely have to use some creativity to get there.
Anything else in the software, David? That was my other big takeaway for it. There's lots of checks and balances. We did our own internal sort of audit of our Salesforce system in terms of just controls, edits, those sorts of things. But what are some key things that the doctor should double check is set up correctly and who has access to what in terms of changes, voiding, deletions, etc. in the software?
Yeah, that's a great question. So practice management software has this concept called administrator rights. And whoever is an administrator in your practice management software basically can change the rules. They can rewrite the rules in your software. So they can, for example, turn off other safeguards. So if you in your software, for example, have enabled a setting that prevents backdated transactions. If somebody has admin rights, they can turn that off and then they can backdate transactions. You should all go and get this tattooed on your arm. The only person who should have administrative rights in your practice management software is a practice owner. You know, I see a lot of practices where you know, you have the office manager and maybe even front desk staff who have administrative rights. And what that means is that those controls that expensive practice management software put there to protect you have no value whatsoever.
Fantastic. Alan, this is a key one. So the feedback from the attendees from the last event, there was a ton of these. We had some great follow-up conversations. Again, if you haven't said yes to following up with David or David's team or Alan, it's the best free guidance money could have. But from that perspective, there was a ton of this. Well, you know what, Alan, my employment contract hasn't been an issue thus far. My lease, you know, my landlord's been okay. You know what, I haven't looked at this for 20 years or so. You know, I know I need to deal with it, but I don't know where to start. Right. And it's just, I've got personal commitments, I've got business issues, I've got all sorts of stuff. And to the thought of, you know, having to just take that first step. I know I need to, but maybe I can stick my head in the sand a little bit longer. I hear all the time. So maybe just from that perspective, Alan, what are some good first steps, right? Dipping the toe in the water to help take some action this evening. Because it's just one of those things that, you know, you wake up, it's just that last little thing in the back of your mind that you know you got to deal with, but just, I'll just keep going. Your thoughts there, Alan, in terms of baby steps, if you will.
Yeah, I'm not under any illusions that people out there love HR or love HR compliance. I know it's on the back burner always. And so I think one of the biggest first steps is just deciding whether you're going to DIY it or you're going to hire some sort of professional. And I mean, that's the same with home improvement projects. It's the same with all this stuff, right? Now, obviously, I'm biased because of what we do. I would just encourage folks to think about the amount of time that it takes. And the biggest thing that I would encourage people to think about is that when it comes to HR, you can't outsource everything. And there are companies out there that will claim, DSOs and others that will claim, oh, we'll take care of everything on the HR side. You won't have to do anything. That's all BS. The reality is there are a whole bunch of things that you as the leader will always have to do, or your manager will have to do, or something. Things like leadership conversations, navigating conflicts, setting the HR vision, anything around benefits, just little things like getting the employees to remember to clock in and out, doing harassment investigations, dealing with an employee who's under the influence. You can't outsource all of that stuff. What you can outsource and save your time and everything is things like researching laws, writing policies, creating documents from scratch, keeping those documents up to date over time. I mentioned earlier how many updates there have been. And so I think it's really important to kind of pick your battles and decide what you really want to do yourself, recognizing that there are some things that you will have to do yourself, whether you like it or not. And then there are plenty of things that you can outsource. We sometimes say that HR kind of has like the fun side and the not fun side. The not fun side is all the rules and laws and policies and paperwork and everything. The fun side is like, throwing a party for your team, taking your team out for coffee, going to lunch, doing kind of the team building side of stuff, employee engagement, setting up CE courses. That's like the fun side of HR. So decide which side of HR you really want to deal with and get rid of the rest.
But if I was a mid-career dentist in Albuquerque, and I've got a handbook or otherwise, I think one of the easiest ones would be is to email you a copy, Alan, set up a time and have you go through your observations. So at least I know, right? Maybe I don't want to change it. Maybe I want to wait. But at least understanding the risks or getting that perspective sounds like is an easy dipping the toe in the water without any major, commitment type thing. Is that a fair
Sure.
assessment?
Yeah, we do policy manual reviews, and there's a variety of things that can happen with those. There's, certainly compliance issues. There's often one of the biggest issues is just missing policies. So maybe the manual was written for federal guidelines, but there's nothing in it about state guidelines. Maybe it was written 10 years ago, and now there's been a whole bunch of new rules that have come out. But yeah, reviewing that is a good first step, getting a sense of where it is, how bad is it? Is it, just kind of, oh, it'd be nice to update it, or is it more like, no, this is actually causing risk and liability right here, right now, certainly.
So same question, David. How bad is it? Building on that from Alan's perspective, by engaging your team or having an initial call, what's a tangible step? It's almost like I don't want to know because Marcy's been with me 20 years, and if she is, I've got to hire someone, I've got to do something. It's a whole piece, and I'd be so disheartened. But I need to know because, hey, I think three or four things you mentioned, David, tonight, I've seen some of those. What's that dip the toe in the water type of thing? What's that first step that might be something they can take action on?
Absolutely. I'll mention, Eric, that I claim to have cured more sleep apnea than most dentists.
Touche.
Because the people who call us have been agonizing because on the one hand they're concerned, and on the other hand it's exactly what you say. They maybe are a little bit fearful of the answer, and the thought of getting rid of their 20-year office manager and having all that institutional knowledge walk out the door and having to replace that is pretty daunting for a lot of dentists, and I get that. What I tell dentists in general is what you do with the information that we give you is completely up to you. But you make way better decisions from knowledge than from ignorance. So yeah, when people call us, and I'm always happy to talk to a dentist who says, either there's something in my practice that's worrying me, in other words, sleep apnea. And, I'd like to have definitive answers, or maybe as far as I know, the sky's blue right now, but I'd love you to look at our controls and find our deficiencies before one of our staff find them for us. And let's proactively address embezzlement risk as opposed to waiting until it happens and then dealing with it. And it's just like dentistry, guys. Prevention is far cheaper and less painful than getting the disease and having it cured. So we love to have conversations. We help somebody assess their risk level and decide if some kind of audit is what they need, or maybe what they should be doing is focusing on shutting the door so that nobody next week or next month decides to steal from them.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. It's the risk and the knowledge because we see it as well. We saw it through COVID, quite frankly, right? We saw a lot of doctors that thought that their landlords were their friends or golfing buddies or they were so nice to me, etc. And suddenly then COVID hit and many landlords wouldn't even pick up the phone, let alone give them any concessions or otherwise. Or if they did, they added personal guarantees and liabilities and demolition clauses and all those sorts of things. So in terms of first steps is same thing. Al and I'd agree. Just having, an appreciation for the time. Our team will do a lease review, demographics, rental rate analysis, etc. So at least right? That's the first step. Just understanding how deep that well is. Understand where the red flags are in the employment contracts, etc. Understand where some of those deficiencies are and come at it from a perspective of power, right? Wow, at least I now know that I'm 20% above market price, or at least I know I've got a personal guarantee. At least I know, Alan, that I haven't updated my employment contracts and it doesn't describe some of the new state specific components that it should. Okay, now what's the risk? And then more importantly, what can I do next? So that brings me to the last big question. I know there's some great questions, Dr. K, performance improvement plans. I did a ton of those in California. Um, Reprimands, what about, what if? So again, the Q&A we'll go to in a moment. But to really bring it full circle now and bring it back together, maybe two, if I can challenge you, Alan, two simple things that you can recommend each attendee to do tomorrow to take some action and get a proactive path to help protect from so many of these, worst case scenarios that we all get phone calls on a frequent basis.
Yeah, I think one is what we just talked about. Take a look at your HR materials. If they haven't been updated in a long time, get them reviewed or just get new ones put together and then you're done. Check in the square because maintaining a properly well-written manual over time is so much easier than writing one and then waiting 10 years and then writing a whole nother one. It's way easier to just maintain it. The second thing, if you want something that you can easily do tomorrow, go to your employees and just tell them how much you appreciate them. Appreciation in the workplace is seriously lacking, and this is across all industries, all size businesses. There's a book, The Five Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. If you want a real nice framework and structure to it, it's on the bookshelf behind me. Very simple, very intuitive, doesn't cost a lot of time or money, but it has a really big impact. And just that little thing of showing your appreciation, telling your employees, being real intentional with that, that'll make a huge difference right off the bat right there. So there's two.
Fantastic. Mr. Harris.
I'm going to touch on a couple of things. First of all, one thing, Eric, that I want to make sure the audience understands, and you hinted at it a few minutes ago, but I want to come back to it. And this is really in Eric's turf more than mine. But I think most dentists do not appreciate the amount of lead time that's required when their lease is going to expire and they have to start working on it. I think for a lot of dentists, this ends up being something that kind of strikes them at the last minute. And Eric has told me over time, the best time to start thinking about your lease renewal is probably 2 years before expiry. So take that to heart, folks, and have a look at your lease and see when the expiry date is. And if it's just on the distant horizon, that's the time to start making decisions about, are you going to renew? Are you going to move? How do you want to position that renewal? How do you want to negotiate with the landlord? And of course, talk to Eric about doing it. In Alan's area, one thing I want to highlight is employment agreements that capture the actual employment terms. One of the things that we're called on to do a lot is investigate payroll fraud. So let's say your office manager is doing your payroll, and they realize that they're not being supervised, and they take advantage of that to change their hourly rate or put in for, and I'm not kidding with this, 80 overtime hours in a single pay period or whatever. When we're called on to investigate payroll theft, the first question we ask inevitably is, how much money is this employee supposed to be paid? In other words, a payroll theft investigation involves determining what should have happened, comparing it to what actually happened, and then finding the difference. The only way we can do that first part is to have some kind of documentation from you, the employer, about what's supposed to happen. So is this an hourly employee or a salaried employee? We're doing an investigation now where, believe it or not, we can't figure that out. We actually cannot confirm whether this employee is on salary or they're paid hourly. If they are an hourly employee, for example, well, how much are they paid per hour? And what kind of time tracking system is there to know how many hours they worked? What we see a lot is either this has never been documented and somebody was kind of hired on a handshake, and 8 years later, they're still there. Or there is an employment agreement, but it dates from 5 years ago, and it shows an hourly rate of $33, and the staff member is being paid $48 right now. So it's really important that what is supposed to happen in your practice with employees, and I'm talking particularly about the office manager, but I think it applies to everybody, that what is supposed to happen with them is documented. And I'll leave it to Alan to address the formality of that. I mean, we, in our role as investigators, it doesn't have to be very formal. A text message from you to your staff member that says, I'm going to increase your hourly rate from 45 to 47. For our purposes, that's fine. Alan's standard is probably a little bit higher than that, and I have no problem with that. But my point is, if that is not documented, then establishing that somebody stole from you via payroll is going to be impossible.
Yeah. Wow. That's yeah, I've never heard you dig into the payroll side before, but that's directly related and a huge issue. And document is where Alan's going next. So that's fantastic as we start to wrap. Again, if this has been a concern of yours, I've pulled up the sort of the exit poll here. So again, if you want the more information or an initial call with Dr. Martin, right? Again, if you do want some assistance and some follow-up from Ben Derrickson and certainly from David Harris and the embezzlement side, quick little section there as well. To the Q&A, and we'll pass through, guys, is Dr. K says, PIP plans for employees. Alan, it's that's a bit of a loaded question, but again, the accountability, hey, some people think the PIP is just messaging to say, I want you out and you're gone, right? Some think it's, it doesn't carry as much teeth or bite as you'd think. And is it going to have more of a negative impact, or is it going to cause the employee to dust off their resume? To Dr. K's perspective, what do you think about PIP plans and how they can be implemented in the dental practice?
Well, I'll give two answers. One, we were having a conversation with our HR specialist team about this a couple weeks ago, and nobody had good experiences with PIPs where it was like, okay, this actually improved behavior and it really turned things around. I will also say something that I say about everything that's performance management related, which is whatever works, works. So if PIPs work and it feels like with your team and your experience, it's really turned things around and had a good impact, then keep doing it. But, ultimately it's just whatever works, and whether that's something really formal or not, or structured, or maybe it's really formal for new employees. For employees that have been there for a long, long time, you back off a little bit. Whatever works, works. And so, but yeah, PIPs are definitely more common in public environments, school teachers, big corporations. Certainly, any sort of written documentation, we would call it an employee counseling memo or a written warning, something like that is really important. Anytime someone is below standards, we certainly want to address that and try to get them above that, whatever it takes. And it's hard when we're talking about a skill set issue, which may require training or guidance or something, versus a behavior issue. Behavior issues, someone should be able to change that starting tomorrow, but that's a whole other conversation.
David, your perspective on PIPs?
Not sure it's something I have a whole lot of wisdom on. I mean, I think the thought behind PIPs is really good. Like, let's identify people who aren't performing, and let's deal with it. And the first step of dealing with it typically is quantifying or documenting how they're not performing. I mean, I think PIP is a buzzword, but as managers, as overseers of people, your job is to monitor performance, and when performance doesn't meet your standards, to do what you have to do to bring it there. I think what Alan's saying is it's one tool, but there are other ones.
My question for you, I've always wondered, David, your videos are unbelievable. It's just like it's out of 60 Minutes or otherwise, where it shows the employee getting arrested and the great work your team does. What's one step back from that? Again, you mentioned the doctor sort of doing what they will. Is there something other than having the office manager leaving in handcuffs to, yeah, something in between, if you will, disciplinary action, other components? Where does that fall? I've
Um,
always been curious of that.
well, go back to something Alan said a minute ago, which is, you have two kinds of behavioral shortfalls. You have kind of knowledge shortfalls where somebody is supposed to know something or have a skill that they don't have. And then you have behavioral shortfalls, which is where somebody isn't behaving the way that you want them to. In my mind, Eric, there's a red line that should never be crossed. If somebody shows up late because their kid's sick and they didn't have anybody to stay home with them, and so on. I mean, that's a behavioral issue, especially if it becomes repetitive, or if somebody just can't manage their life well enough to get to work on time. So that's a behavioral issue that I would look at and say, it may be correctable and it may not, but correcting it is probably worth a try.
Perfect.
On the
Alan,
other on the other hand,
yeah.
if somebody is claiming that their kid is sick and it's really because they're too hungover to come into work, now we've crossed the line from I can't organize my life well to I'm lying to my employer. And in my mind, crossing that line is something where I would think that corrective action isn't what we should be doing, and that the true correction is to fire them and get somebody whose values are closer to ours.
Right.
Any form of stealing from the employer, no, in my mind, no matter how small, it puts somebody irretrievably across that line. So to me, there is no rehabilitation from stealing. And almost every dentist I have ever met who caught somebody stealing, and the person, made a teary confession and swore on a large stack of Bibles that they would never do it again. Almost everybody who has felt sorry for that employee and kept them around has regretted it. And I'll give you a case in point. We did an investigation on the East Coast a couple of years ago, and it was somebody who had stolen first via payroll. They took about $180,000 in payroll. It got caught by the practice's accountant. The dentist confronted the staff member. The staff member burst into tears, promised to pay it back, and said, "I will never do it again." And she kept her word. She never stole in payroll again. However, what she did instead was she stole $220,000 of incoming revenue. So,
To pay back the original
oh
payroll.
no, the original was never paid back. It just took the total from 180 to about 380.
Ugh.
Yeah, there was no repayment. But the doctor and most doctors have big hearts. They're altruistic people, and I love them for it, but it gets them into trouble at times. And this doctor felt sorry for this person and said, "Yes, I will give you another chance." And that moment of weakness cost the doctor $200,000 and has changed the trajectory of their practice. I mean, that's going to change their retirement date.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, there are some things that I think are able to be rehabilitated. Dishonesty is not one of them.
Very true. Alan, I know you've got a hard stop. If you do have time, the last question was, what are some reprimands to address not being accountable?
Oh boy. Let's see. So I would go back to this framework of, have you communicated the expectations? What are the expectations? Do they know what the expectations are? Hard to hold someone accountable for something they don't know they're supposed to be doing. Um, and then beyond that, it's, what I said earlier of just, you gotta hit it quick. So don't wait, as soon as that happens, address it. You can address it, like Dr. Martin said, in kind of a manner where you believe that this person can get better, that they can achieve. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding with what they did at their previous office, something like that. Uh, Definitely a red flag. And kind of to David's last point, someone who just does not take any accountability for it whatsoever. You sit down with them and they say, well, this is my fault because Eric didn't train me properly and David, rushed through the onboarding and da 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 da. If there is absolutely never any shred, even just a little shred of accountability, that's a huge red flag. So definitely keep your eye out for that. I mean, if someone takes accountability for it and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I will do better," and then they don't do better, now we have an integrity problem, not an accountability problem, but we still have a problem. So yeah, all of that. Just I think the biggest thing is just have the courage to address it and address it quickly. I think there's always this thing of, well, I'll think about it, or well, maybe now's not a good time. Maybe I should do it next week. Oh, I'm busy next week, and just these things just drag out, and that's where we have the biggest problems.
Understood. Um, David, same thing to you as we wrap up on the specific accountability side of things.
Yeah, I'll side with Alan on this one, Eric. Failing to address it quickly, and I'll add one more reason to the list Alan did of not tackling an HR kind of problem head on. I think the behavior will correct itself over time. In other words, if I stick my head in the sand, this might go away on its own. And when I put it that way, I think everybody can see that that's maybe a little bit self-delusional. But yeah, identify and address performance shortfalls quickly. And it's a whole lot easier to have that, the first or second time that you see somebody deviate from the norm. It's a whole lot easier to have the conversation then than when it's happened 15 times. And inevitably, when something has happened 15 times and you're bringing it up at that point, you're pissed off.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing. We're all married guys, and we have spouses, and we deal with them too. And it's the same thing. If your spouse does something that bugs you and you comment on it after the 15th time, I mean, at that point you're frustrated, and how can you keep doing this to me?
Yep.
As if they should have known for the first 14 times that you didn't say something that you weren't happy, but you just chose not to address it, right? That's kind of the approach that we have when we talk to somebody who's done something wrong 15 times. So
Yep.
emotionally, for the dentist, it's a lot easier to catch it on time one or time two, and then you can have a polite conversation and say, I really wish it would happen this way, as
Right.
opposed to time 15 when you're feeling kind of put upon.
Yep.
Alan?
Humans are unique and crazy and special, and the things we do sometimes do not make any logical sense, and that's normal and frustrating, and it's all the things. And that's why HR is so exciting, because there's rules and laws, but then there's humans, and humans are special. So I gotta go, guys. Thank you all
Thank you
very
so much,
much.
Alan. Greatly appreciated. David, there was one extra one if you've got another minute. Dr. D
I,
was asking some
I sure
questions
do.
about dividing up the financial duties.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few. I know that's a deeper dive type of questions, but how would you advise Dr. D in terms of dividing that up or pulling someone from the back up front to help with certain aspects, or maybe the doctor as well, specifically to the financial duties?
Okay, I'll try to condense. I think what's a fairly lengthy topic into a short answer. When we look at the revenue cycle, there are 6 tasks. Treatment gets entered into practice management software. Patients and insurance companies get billed. Hopefully, they pay. Those payments get recorded in practice management software, and then there's balancing that happens at the end of the day, and then there's a bank deposit. So those are the 6 components of the revenue cycle. And I have 3 rules for those. The first rule is the only people who should be entering treatment into practice management software are clinicians who are in the room when the treatment was done. In other words, if you're a dentist, Eric, and I'm sitting in your chair having a crown done, either you or more likely your assistant should be entering the procedure codes for a crown into your software while I'm sitting there in the chair. That's rule number one. And what that does is it means that by the time I get to the front desk, I already owe the practice money. And if somebody's going to steal my payment, they now have to deal with that balance that I have in the software. And whatever they do to that balance is going to be visible.
Hmm.
On the other hand, if you leave it to front desk people to enter the treatment, they can change they can kind of downgrade what was done, which is going to cause the patient to overpay.
Uh-huh.
So if instead of a crown, I'm entering this at the front desk and I enter an onlay, I can pocket the difference. So rule number one: treatment gets entered in the clinical area, never at the front desk. So you have 5 things left. Patients and insurance companies get billed, they pay. The payments get recorded in practice management software, balancing at the end of the day, and then the deposit. 2 rules for those. The first is none of your team should do more than 2 of those 5 jobs. Okay, really simple. Nobody does more than 2. And the second rule is the 2 that somebody does cannot be consecutive. So the person who does balancing at the end of the day is not the same person who makes your bank deposit. And what that forces is work to be passed from one person to another. And if there's a discrepancy, that is likely to bring it up. In other words, the person who's making the bank deposit is responsible for seeing how much should be in that deposit and whether that's the amount that is actually going into the bank. And that forces the oversight over the person who did the last job, which was balanced. So those are the rules.
That's yeah, those are great tangible key tips. Thank you, Dr. S, for the excellent comment there. I'll address one. Dr. Q, is it okay to have your office manager run annual staff reviews? I'll certainly share that from maybe stepping in from Alan's perspective is I would say no, right? I mean, look, it's a great opportunity, especially if you're only doing them manually, to get a good feedback. It's great to see your office manager having the conversations, touching on tangible data points of what's working and what's not. And more importantly, it gives the employee the ability to give some feedback for you to hear as well. So it's that if you believe in that 360 points of feedback, you can also give some positive encouragement or otherwise. And I would definitely say that if you have the opportunity to join your office manager for those annual staff reviews, definitely do so because you do want to make sure it's all documented. You want to make sure it's signed off on. And again, they're going to appreciate your time as well as maybe share some extra components or give you a much better lay of the land, or if there is a staffing or a conflict, shall we say, or a personality challenge between the office manager and the staff member, right? You can be there and you can see very quickly if it goes off the rails or actually uncover some cultural issues. The last one, just in the essence of time, is staffing bonuses. David, I'll throw that to you. My 2 cents on bonuses are it's fantastic, right? If there's a mutual beneficial that if it's driven on top line or if it's based on certain other financial thresholds or if it's hidden certain performance targets, look, if we can stretch, right, that really helps to make a meaningful impact to monthly or annual income, I think is can be a key piece. Let's win together, right? And it doesn't have to just be a total monetary perspective, but hey, guys, look, if we set a target of increasing of 5% year over year, or if we, and it's less of a financial, I don't know if it was David or who I did a recent event with, but the feedback was fantastic. It was less about, guys, we need to do 100,000 this month or 30,000 this week or 10,000 today. It was about how many patients can we help? And that was a really neat little tidbit that I've tried to incorporate into our business. But that was a really neat piece to say, guys, if we can help 25 patients today, right, and 250, 500 this month type of thing, whatever that may be for you, right, then here's what we will do together. Maybe that's a night out. Maybe it's a trip. Maybe it's going to Chicago midwinter or going to Henry Schein's Thrive Live in Vegas or otherwise. Maybe there's something fun that we can do for it. David, I see you nodding. Your thoughts there, sir?
I see two sides to bonuses. On the one hand, if you can make an employee's economic interest parallel to yours, they become much easier to manage. If you want them to make decisions that are in their interest but aligned with yours, that's an employee who needs less supervision. So that's the good side of bonusing. The bad side is that I find bonuses fall into one of two categories. They're either overly simplistic, which means they don't capture all of the different facets that are needed to have a successful dental practice. For example, I saw one practice where the doctor thought the receivables were getting a little out of control. So he put a bonus plan in place that emphasized the collecting of old receivables. What the staff did next was they dropped everything else and they tried to collect receivables, and they were very successful at that. But then the hygienist chair started to have openings. And I think most of the dentists in the audience understand that when their hygienist has openings in their chair, yours is next, because everybody who sits in your chair got there through the hygienist. So, the wheels came off the wagon with this practice fairly quickly, and the doctor solved the narrow problem that he was trying to solve. But in their rush to do that, the staff neglected some other things. So your bonus can either be, it can either focus on a problem area and, as I say, predictably cause problems in other areas, or you try to do some bonus based on, for example, profitability, which really encompasses all the aspects of the practice. The problem then is you kind of have to open your books to your staff a bit, and I'm not sure that's always a good idea. So I've seen a lot of bonus plans over the years, and there aren't a lot that I really like. Now, what Eric was mentioning a minute ago was maybe we get away from financial stuff and we get into more intangible stuff, like, how many 5-star Google reviews did we get this month? Might be, and I'm just throwing that out there as something that somebody might want to base some bonus on. But you don't put Google reviews in your pocket. You put profitability. So now you're back to, emphasizing something that has maybe a slightly ephemeral link to how much money you take home. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I don't have a good solution for bonuses. I like the idea of making employees feel like they have a proprietary interest in your practice, but I'm just not sure how to do it well.
Understood. Well, we'll put a pin in it there. That was some great additional times. We certainly thank you for those that stuck through the extra questions. Incredible involvement, high participation in all the polls. David, thank you, first of all, for your continued time and best practices. Those are some of the most comprehensive pearls I think I've seen you ever share, which is fantastic. So truly appreciate it. Love the new format. We're looking to, if there's interest, I didn't do a poll for that one, but we may do another one on AI and the impact of dentistry and the business of dentistry and these sort of aspects. So, if you're interested in that, let us know. We'll certainly be in touch. Thank you for reaching out. We will follow up and share this, obviously, with the many of you that asked for a follow up from David and his team, as well as the complimentary follow up from Dr. Martin and Metamorphosis Coaching, and certainly Alan, who's off to parent teacher interviews this evening. So. Thank you very much for everyone's time. Thank you for your positive results and feedback. And thank you, David.
All right.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
day.
everybody. Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody. Have a great night.